Look, I'm going to take. If we can have a bit of hush, that would be good. I'm going to pose the first question, which is both to Sam and to David. The fascination with violence in America, it's almost in the cultural DNA of America. I mean, you think about the love of capital punishment. They imprison more than the rest of the world put together. Trump has just announced that he wants a 10-fold increase in the possession of nuclear weapons. So my question really is about the underlying culture of violence that is not addressed by American politicians.
Look, I probably kind of edge more on that the culture is created, that things can evolve differently. When you think of Australian history, it was brutally violent. We have a terrible history here in Australia, and I think although on some issues haven't come very far, we've also come very far on other issues. In America, the culture around violence and firearms is no doubt created or matured and cultured by the NRA. The NRA has the most amazing marketing system that the world has ever seen. It has told people that in order to survive in America, you need a firearm. Now that is a marketing ploy, better than Coca-Cola, better than any tobacco company. And the culture of violence actually has, in particularly around firearms, has evolved out of that. It's come to, well, I'm not going to put down my gun unless you put your gun down first. And everyone's too scared to put down their firearm. If the people in America continue to push for change, they're targeting organisations that deliver funding to the NRA, they're targeting politicians who are benefiting from the NRA. If the NRA collapses, you will see dramatic change in the gun culture in America.
Well, Stuart, I think I agree with what Sam's put, that you do create culture, and particularly on guns. I recall in the 1980s, as a teenager, my father had a couple of guns, and I recall going and buying bullets in Kmart as a kid. There was no... You go to Kmart. I remember the back of Kmart at Hornsby. There was a whole series of display cabinets, and you could go and buy bullets from Kmart as a kid. Well, it just seemed to be normal, utterly normal. But you talk to people whose, political and social maturity has happened since 1996, and they've probably never seen a gun in their life. We've changed the culture, fundamentally changed the culture, and I think you can change the culture. You see how quickly it happens as it's happened in Australia. And that's, I suppose, what the NRA is super frightened of, that they know they've got a kind of fragile control over it. It's called a defence fantasy. That's what psychiatrists and psychologists call it in the United States, this defence fantasy, the thought that having a gun will keep you safer. And if you have a gun, somehow you'll become some kind of TV-styled expert in handguns and be able to pull it out and rapidly shoot the 8 intruders that are coming into your house. That were, of course, any expert will tell you if you want to have proficiency in a handgun, particularly if you're talking about it in a dark, frightened evening setting or low-light setting or a confrontational setting, proficiency for handgun use in that situation requires hundreds and hundreds of hours of continuous training every year to even have a base-level proficiency. And pulling out a handgun or shotgun or assault rifle in a domestic setting at your home, allegedly as some kind of defence measure, is probably one of the most lethal things you can do in one of those, is the most lethal thing you can do in one of those situations. And in fact, all the statistics show that you're vastly less safe having a firearm in your house. But the myth the NRA have sold, and it's a myth that Sam touched upon, is this defence fantasy. And, you know, the only defence to a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. But it's a fragile cultural creation, and we've shown how you can break it.
Thank you very much for your very informative talk. Okay, do you feel that the pervasive nature of gun use in America it represents a culture of violence, which is linked to American foreign policy aggression, the use by the police and security forces of army war surplus in the shooting of unarmed civilians, and the racialisation of violence, the growing inequality, gated suburbs, the fear of the other, and that as you say, that defence culture, fantasy, is linked to that, and also I'm thinking too about the furor that's surrounding Lee Rhiannon's support for the movie Kangaroo: A Love-Hate Story, which shows explicit footage of kangaroos being massacred by guns, and the support that movie receives from the conservative end of politics, the conservative media, and the Shooter and Fishers Party, which is no doubt funded by the American National Riflemen's Association. So, your answer.
Okay, Kieran, modest question.
Well, I did touch upon what I think is the way gun violence fits within a kind of racial divide in the United States, and that many, you know, privileged, powerful legislators see gun violence as a problem of the other, you know, black on black violence, violence in Hispanic communities, violence in poor communities, violence amongst drug-using communities, and they're somehow more comfortable with that violence and willing to sort of write it off and not take actions to stop it. And undoubtedly that sort of economic inequality and continuing racial division in the United States is part of why it hasn't been solved, undoubtedly. The idea about a culture of violence, though, I think is a kind of deeper question. And we've seen in the New South Wales setting how guns and hunting are seen to be either side of the same argument, and celebrating this sort of machismo culture of out there self-reliance, shooting, hunting, and attaching that to gun ownership and the right to gun ownership is actually part of the sales pitch for the gun lobby. And I think that is a toxic example of promoting and celebrating violence. And the fact that both major parties, again, in New South Wales, actively support the opening up of our public forest estate to hunting and killing, and they pretend it's about conservation, and it's not. Yeah, and indeed, you know, all the evidence about, somehow you think that, well, if you let a few hunters into a state forest and they kill a few cats, surely that's got to be good for the native wildlife going forward. If they take out 3 cats or kill 25 rabbits or shoot 2 foxes and they step away, surely on balance, there'll be an improvement for native wildlife in that forest. All of the best evidence says that that's crap. That feral and wild introduced animals are so successful because they massively overpopulate, and they produce this thing called a doomed surplus. And rabbits and foxes and cats massively overpopulate, and so most of their offspring will die from natural causes or competition or disease anyhow. And so taking out 5 or 10% of the cat population or the fox population or the rabbit population has zero impact on the overall numbers year in, year out, one season after the other. Yet they sell that conservation hunting, they link it to violence, they link it to machismo, and we need to break that link.
Thank you both for that informative talk. When I watch the news and when I watch documentaries about the shootouts, I see that it always goes back to support for a military-industrial complex. And my question has something to do with something close to our hearts. Malcolm Turnbull announced his industrial strategy for Australia to be a major arms manufacturer in the region. How does that impact this campaign? I mean, when I think of the relationship between the two, it gives me goosebumps. How do we fight it? Thank you.
Yeah, Gun Control Australia recently looked at donations from Arms Company to the major political parties, and we found that there had been financial benefits to both Labor and Liberal Party from the major defence companies. The defence companies also market in arms and small arms. Thales here in Australia owns what's known as Lithgow Arms in Lithgow, and they are producing new firearms for the markets here in Australia. So it all filters through. If you give money to these big defence companies will use that money to fund production of new firearms. And what they're trying to do in Australia at the moment is find new markets. And the way they are doing that is by designing and producing high-powered, rapid-style hunting rifles. The hunting market in Australia is the biggest firearms market, and so they want that. Arms companies, defence companies are no different to coal companies, tobacco companies. What they want is to make money, and the way they make money is to find new markets. And again, in Australia, the new market or the extending market is the recreational hunting market.
Right, my question is not so much about the gun violence in Australia vis-a-vis America. I just want to ask you, how do we compare with nations like New Zealand, Japan, Scandinavia? Because if you are going to compare yourself, you should compare with someone worth comparing. So can you throw some light on that, please?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, when you compare us to America, our firearms rate is pretty low. When you compare us to countries like Japan and New Zealand, we're still doing pretty well, actually. New Zealand does pretty bad. Japan isn't, I need to recollect my data, but I think we're kind of in between Japan and New Zealand, but don't take me on word for that because I need to refresh my memory about the data. But it's not just about gun numbers, it's also about gun culture. These countries have different cultures, but certainly what research has shown is that the greater number of firearms in the community, the greater likelihood that you'd have increased violence in the country. So it really is about access to firearms. In addition, the culture surrounding that country itself.
Yes, where I think from my memory from the stats is we're between Japan and New Zealand. Japan has even more restrictive gun control laws than we do, and lower levels of gun violence. New Zealand has much less stringent gun control laws and higher levels of gun violence and firearms homicide than New South Wales and than Australia. So. But you can then, the gun lobby will then give you some false comparisons. They'll compare Australia to Switzerland, say, and because of the way the Switzerland self-defence arrangements operate, there's lots of assault rifles floating around in Switzerland, all 100% secured in safe storage and controlled, and all there as part of their national defence structure. And they have very low level of gun violence. So it's purpose and culture, as well as gun control laws that work together to keep us safe. And that's why I think standing up to the hunting culture, standing up to the concept that we would want to become a global arms dealer and manufacturer, standing up to the New South Wales government's efforts where they've got a New South Wales agency designed to encourage defence industry and expenditure in New South Wales, standing up to those cultural things is, I think, as important as standing firm on gun laws as well.
Hi, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for the talk. So my question is, amongst my peers, there are some people who are self-proclaimed Marxists and communists, and in response to the recent inflamed debate over gun control because of Florida and the same reasons as why we're here tonight, they seem to be hesitant to back gun control because of taking the argument of guns being in the hands of the masses and arming the proletariat. And I'm just unsure of how to approach my peers and people who are younger than 25, mind you. I'm not sure how to approach them in this argument, and just wondering if you could give me some advice.
That's a great question.
Thank you.
Is anybody here under 25? Who's going to? No, yeah.
I think the best way of responding to it is the kind of right to bear arms that's found in the United States Constitution was done at a time when the arms they were talking about were muzzle-loading muskets. And the idea being that, you know, the state had a certain number of muskets and large sort of, you know, pre-industrial cannons, and they had a capacity to project power. And if you wanted to have a kind of liberty in the face of that, there needed to be some muzzle-loading muskets in the community and in the militia to prevent that state expressing it, having absolute monopoly of power. And you know, it's in the context of muzzle-loading muskets. Go forward to 2018. The state no longer has muzzle-loading muskets or even just AR-15s. The state has now drones and fighter aircraft and sophisticated surveillance devices and a capacity to deliver force, concentrated force that is beyond anything that was considered in the 1780s and the 1790s. And you know, I've heard the argument too that sort of guns in the community give you the power to strike back and force your liberty. But I'll be quite frank with you, sitting in your home with an AR-15 when the New South Wales Tactical Police Force is outside with armoured vehicles, and if it gets really serious, if you're talking about a sort of revolutionary moment, the Australian Army is out there with a panoply of weapons that they have at their hand. The idea that there's some sort of protection of freedom and liberty or the chance to revolt because you've got an AR-15 is fanciful, absolutely fanciful. In fact, if anything, the proliferation of guns like that in the community would just simply see a beefed up paramilitary response from the state and make us all a lot less safe.
I mean, one line is that liberty results from being able to walk into a country without fear of being attacked by any gun violence. I mean, liberty is more than owning property. Guns are property, and there is things beyond property that provide liberty, and that is safety.
So the speakers, I apologise, I missed the first speaker, so whether this topic has been raised. I'm speaking as a former teacher, and I just wanted to say that one of the greatest nightmares I can imagine is teachers being armed. And that has been raised by Donald Trump, and apparently it's a serious proposition that they are going to arm teachers in the United States. A friend of mine put on Facebook, picture the scene. You've just had 5 classes of very, very tense teaching, and you come into class number 6. And some boys up the back play up, and you've got a gun on your holster. I know this is a joke, you know, but just imagine the disasters that could happen. Teachers need a lot of things, and that was brought up in a lot of the memes about teachers want more books, they want more psychologists to help people that have problems, they want all these different assistance, but the one thing they do not need is to have a gun in the classroom. So I just wonder if you could mention that. By the way, just on an anecdote, I see that some kids got wounded just a day or so ago from a teacher who didn't know how to handle his gun and it went off. Sure. I mean, as a solution, this seems the absolute most disastrous solution of all.
Yeah. It's not a solution. Again, it's a marketing tool. This is being pushed by the NRA to get more guns bought by teachers and playing into that whole fear mentality, which is killing Americans. I mean, it's going to put teachers in a worse position than what they are already in. We don't live in the movies. In the places where these massacres are happening are places where people are allowed to carry concealed firearms. You don't see in these massacres people that are carrying these concealed firearms coming out and shooting the perpetrator. What happens is that during these massacres, people are going about their daily lives, going to school, going to movies, seeing a concert. They don't expect anything dangerous to happen. Someone takes them by surprise by an AR-15 assault rifle. What do you think they would do? Run, hide. And that's what people do. If you look at any footage in regards to massacres or gun violence, people run. I would run. I am no hero. I tell you, it would be absolutely terrifying. And teachers in these circumstances, if they don't run, they will be targeted because the perpetrator will think they are armed. They will also possibly shoot themselves, more likely than shoot, well, but they won't shoot the perpetrator, they'll shoot themselves. They'll shoot and then they'll shoot another student or many students. They'll shoot another teacher, and they will be part of the violence just from no fault of their own. It is the most disastrous set of circumstances.
G'day guys, thanks for the invite. I do think that gun laws are very important, and it's good that we have this discussion. Just during the time that you guys were speaking though, I've written down a whole list of things which I have some contention with the veracity of the things that you've said. Do you mind if I mention some of those?
Well, yeah, but I must finish in about 2 or 3 minutes. So
okay.
if you can get through this in 60 seconds, okay, that's fine. But 61 seconds.
So first of all, Sam, you mentioned that background checks were removed for subsequent firearms purchases. The only way that a licensed firearms owner can purchase a gun is by applying. The only way that a licensed firearm owner can purchase a gun is through a system called a permit to acquire, a PTA. Once they've got their license, they can't just go to a gun store and buy a gun. They have to apply to the police for every single firearms purchase. That is the opportunity for the police to say, hey, look, mate, why do you need this one? What have you been doing the past 12 months? So that idea of the background checks being removed, I've got to say that's bogus. The other one that you mentioned, David, about the watering down of the safe storage laws, the reason why that was brought in was because of minor little indiscretions, like, for example, if someone dropped a bullet and rolled behind a cabinet. Under the previous laws, that person would get absolutely slammed by the book. They would lose everything. The reason why that was brought in, it was because of simple indiscretions which aren't really going to hurt anybody. But by the letter of the law, they would lose everything. So by bringing it into the line with the discretion of the police officer, like no police officer is going to let somebody get away with unsafe storage of a firearm. It's just for minor indiscretions like that previously, dropping a bullet and it rolling under the table and they didn't see it, ordinarily they would lose everything because of that. Also, the idea that around the world less guns equals less crime and more guns equals more crime, it's simply not the case, and I encourage everybody to go and do research on that. There's a wonderful website, the Crime Prevention Research Centre actually studies this. They took the homicide rates from around the world, overlaid it with gun ownership rates around the world, and what you actually find is a slight inverse of that. The country with the highest...
Sorry, no, you're going to have to roll it up out of deference to our colleagues round the corner.
Look, I appreciate you coming, and but I've got to say I forget the name of the website, the Crime Prevention. Yep. Yeah, it's the sponsors of that research is the gun lobby. I mean, the sponsors of the academic research is the gun lobby. And in fact, this is one of the challenges you have in gun control. On the side of the community and effective gun laws, you have a disparate group of people with a common interest but no common economic footing. Citizens around the country who all collectively don't want to see guns saturate their community, but they're not making money from being safe. They're just being safe. Whereas on the other side, you have a very concentrated group of industry which makes money from making us less safe. And they've got concentrated economic power and the money they have to produce bullshit studies like the tobacco lobby before them, and create these false analyses between gun numbers and violence, which have been proven false by statistical research by academics, and we can contest that.
By an academic in Australia who's never been to university, by the way. That's
Philip Alpers and others. By Philip Alpers and others, some of the most respected academics in the area and Simon Chapman. And, you know, you may not like Philip Halpers, and the gun lobby doesn't like Philip Halpers, and they don't like Simon Chapman.
There are
but
others
there's some
out
of
there
the
who you could research
some
as
of the
well.
most respected gun control advocates. And you know, against the gun lobby, we've got Sam Lee and the 2.5 staff in my office. And that has produced a really toxic set of academic papers and researchers funded and designed by the gun lobby. So when Bob Carr changed the laws and said someone could just walk off the street and grab a gun at a gun club, the argument was, oh, there'll be all this supervision, it'll all be safe, no harm will come of it. And we've already seen a death and a homicide. When this government has changed the laws on safe storage, they say it'll apply, as the gun lobby have said, to just if there's one loose bullet. But of course the discretion applies across the board, and the change in culture applies across the board. These laws make a difference. They keep us safe, they save lives, and I don't apologise for them.
Thanks for your question. And I want to say that gun owners in general are not people that generally want to go out and commit massacres. I think majority of gun owners actually do abide by the laws and do support the laws. In fact, we get emails from gun owners who actually want to support what we do. So there's a mix. And you're right about the permit to acquire, that for your first firearm, you must get what's called a permit to acquire, and you wait 28 days for them to do a background check. If you want a second gun, though, a hunting rifle that is, the permit to acquire you still need to get, but it's a day turnover, and they don't wait 28 days, and they don't do those background checks. So that's where the difference lies.
So when she says a day turnover, that's
next
not correct.
question.
It's going to take several weeks for you to get that back from the police.
Yeah, hi. Brian Concannon. I'm all for gun control, but I'd just like to know your thoughts about 92% of gun massacres are held in gun-free zones. And also, there's a big coincidence with drills held on the same day. 9/11, London bombings, the Boston Marathon, Florida shooting. Everyone was expecting a drill that same day, a fire gun drill. And when the alarms did go off, everyone thought it was a drill. Well, it's just a super strange coincidence. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay.
You see some cities in the United States, like Chicago, with terrible levels of gun violence, and they'll take the city will take some steps to put in some gun control laws to limit the number of handguns and the like that are available in Chicago. And we'll put in some stringent gun control laws. But a half-hour drive from Chicago, or a 15-minute drive from Chicago, there's a neighbouring state which has some of the laxest gun laws in the civilised world. And so the gun lobby will say, well, look at Chicago. They've got tough gun control laws, but they've got terrible levels of gun violence. So that's a terrible failure of gun control. No, it's not. It's a failure of the United States patchwork controls on gun laws that allow those local efforts to be undermined by literally a state that's a 15-minute drive away, and you can just shop at the Walmart and bring the guns across the border. So those studies from the United States, I think, are deeply deceptive. And what you're often seeing is often communities of colour and economic disadvantage, taking steps in their community to save themselves from gun violence. And then quite often, not always, but quite often in a wealthy community that's a 15-minute drive away, or a whole series of profitable gun supply businesses that make money from exporting their misery to the community half an hour down the road. And I think that's part of that really offensive nature of the gun control debate in the United States, that dysfunction is somehow tolerated and used as an argument not for gun control.
Lucky last, because I've been behind the desk the whole time, working ill. But just also to maybe finish this on a positive note. So I've seen that there are a number of businesses now that are refusing to offer discounts to NRA members. There are businesses that are refusing to fund the NRA. The NRA. Someone nearly said that before. And also that there are stores that are refusing to stock weapons. On the other hand, the NRA have sent threatening letters to politicians to try and force them into expressing support. Have you got an update for us on whether the NRA is being brought down, or whether we should really fear that they are going to, counterattack in a bad way?
We do know, just from reporting, that NRA membership has started to decline slightly, which I think is very positive. There's also videos going around of people that own firearms destroying them online, which I think is quite powerful as well. And I certainly do believe that looking at the businesses who are helping to fund the NRA, that the young people are onto that, and that is spreading fairly quickly, and people are starting to boycott some of those businesses, which I think is quite powerful.
Historically, probably the greatest single asset the NRA have had in their political fights in Washington in particular has been their sense of invincibility. You can't beat them, has been the argument. And they have targeted individual congressmen and senators to destroy them politically if they take any steps on gun control. And what gives me the greatest sense of hope is that the movement amongst students that is now sparking that broader movement, if that has one victory, just one victory against the NRA, they will lose that aura of invincibility. And with that, I think, it'll be the emperor has no clothes moment. The public wants it, and once the public get an appetite for it, they'll want more of it. And then my hope is the NRA will become a remnant of its current self in terms of its political power. That's the hope, and that's the hopeful message I'll end with.
Okay, well, look, you're aware we've had two first-rate, gutsy, principled speakers on this topic. There's probably one dimension to the argument that we haven't touched on too much, and that's that the other side of the coin, which is about the fascination with violence, the love of weaponry of all kinds across the culture, is the illiteracy about non-violence, because the philosophy and the language and the practice of non-violence has never killed anybody. So maybe that's, we can't invite Mahatma Gandhi back, but there are lots of contemporary versions. David wants to ask one more. You're allowed to ask a question.
Well, no, it's we have a website where we've got the data for the number of guns in New South Wales, and I don't know if you've done it, but if you're interested about the reality in your own suburb and your own patch, you can go on to tooManyGuns.org. That's TOOMANY guns.org. Plug in your postcode, and you can find out how many registered guns there are in your suburb, how many licensed firearms owners there are in your suburb, and how many guns are held by the person with the largest private arsenal who isn't a collector. The gun lobby hates that website. Share it around. Be surprised. It turns out in Surrey Hills, I've just done the search, there are 254 firearms registered in Surrey Hills, and there's somebody in Surrey Hills that for some unknown bloody reason has 60 firearms in their own property in Surrey Hills, and that's a small one.
Is that person a member of Politics in the Pub? I don't know. Okay. Look, I'm asked to make two quick announcements. One is about a seminar this Sunday from 2 to 4 at 122 Little Everleigh Street. It's on local government and the spectre of economic rent seeking. Okay, I now suddenly got umpteen. Then there's a protest on Friday week about every Friday freeing the hostages from Manus and Nauru, 6 to 7 p.m. in front of the Queen Victoria building. Then there's a massive rally on March the 24th at 12 noon. Time to choose: clean air, clean water, clean energy. And the topic for next Thursday evening at Politics in the Pub is white supremacy, white innocence and inequality in Australia. You've been a great audience. Thank you for coming.